Welcome to another episode of Chattin with Staxx. I'm your host, Bill-Staxx, and today I got Gary Jenkins. What's up, man?
Not much. Dude, I'm trying to set something up for tonight. You just came in just as we got started here. So I'm great, man. I'm great. It's raining like hell here. It has been for 2 or 3 days, but other than that, I'm doing good.
Yeah,
it's great. Thanks for having me on the show, by the way.
Yeah, no problem. Great to be here. I watch your show, man. Your show is awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So your background is in law enforcement.
It is.
Yeah, and I want to know, like, how was it before the law enforcement? How was it like growing up and all that? What was your whole background like?
Interesting question. I don't usually get asked that. They usually want me to tell police stories, but I'd say there's not that much difference in many cops and many professional criminals. In that we both like action, we both are get bored easily, and we both kind of like to kind of skirt along the edge. So as a young man, I grew up on a farm actually, but I really didn't know. We lived in town, and my older brother did all the farm work, and I didn't really have to. And I grew up in town, a small town, but I wanted to be a cowboy. I grew up. I wanted to have a gun and a horse and a 30-30 lever action rifle and go out and have adventure just like the cowboys on TV and the movies did.
Yeah.
Get on forward. I become a teenager and then I like fast cars and motorcycles.
Yeah.
So it's and beautiful girls. So that was I kind of forgot about being a cowboy until they had a big hiring push with the Kansas City Police Department, and then that came back into my head like I could do this. I can do this, and they'll give me a gun. They just won't give me a 30-30 lever action Winchester. They'll give me a 12 gauge Remington probably, but and they won't give me a Palomino horse. They'll give me a 1971 Plymouth Fury, but it'll be basically the same way. So.
Yeah,
that's kind of what it was growing up. Now, as a teenager, I was a bit wild, shall we say, and as this one friend of mine liked to remind me after I went on the police department, he said, "You remember that time we went to the auto show and they had that big display with a bunch of bikers that were there, had their bikes there, and we got that." It was like a thing you'd put in the window of your car that said, "The only good cop is a dead cop." Like we thought that was so funny.
Oh man.
I said, "Yeah, I remember Eddie." But now I are one, so it's a different world now. Yeah, we hated cops back then. We hated cops as teenagers. All teenage boys do. Especially if you like fast cars, you're gonna hate cops. You see them as the enemy, and they're the ones that are always trying to keep you from having fun.
Yeah. Was there any mob things going around in Kansas City when you were growing up that you noticed?
Oh, yeah, there was. I mean, I remember, I grew up, this is how long ago it was. I grew up during the 50s, and that was a Kefauver hearings came to Kansas City. I remember talk about the syndicate. And there wasn't in the popular culture, there wasn't much about the mob that you could really tell it was about the mob in movies and TV. But I do remember something about the syndicate. We called it the syndicate then, or the mob, and it had something to do with Kansas City. But of course, I was about 50 miles out of town here, so I didn't really, I didn't grow up around those guys like some people. If you grew up in a city, many times you might have known people who were involved or peripherally connected to it or something like that. But I really never did. And then as I became a teenager, I didn't really, that kind of went out of my life particularly. Like I said, I just, when I came on the PD, I just wanted to be a cowboy and go out and work in the action precincts, and which I did for a while. But then I realized that, I was smarter than that. I like going after the guys that are thinkers and planners and plotters and give me somebody that's got some chutzpah and also got some brains to work on, not just these street buffs that, if they just bumble around, and next thing they know they're caught, they're doing 3 or 4 years and come back out, they bumble around and they do something stupid and because they're drunk or drugged up, and they get caught and they do 4 or 5 years. And each time it's a little bit more until they can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
And then they come out and they say, I can't take it anymore, man. I was used to say 50 years old is a great barrier against recidivism. Once a guy turns 50, it gets really hard to go back to the penitentiary. When you're 30, it ain't so hard for a lot of people.
Well, when I was 30, that's when I stopped. I was 31, I believe, and I stopped going to prison. I stopped associating with people. I got clean 3 years ago, and I'm not looking back, man. You know.
So you turned 30, you couldn't take it anymore.
No.
I can't take this shit anymore.
No.
There's another way to live.
Yeah, there definitely is. And that's why I do this show. I want to show people that there's another way to live.
Oh, cool. I'm always glad to talk to people that found another way to live.
Man.
I told you before, I found a little different way to live myself. But as a young man, it's, we do a lot of crazy things, even as a policeman. And we do a lot of crazy things, and usually under the influence of alcohol or drugs. And finally, we wise up.
Is there any situations that you had while you were a police officer in your early days that come to mind, like any that really pop out in your mind? Any investigations that you did or anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I first had this realization about the lifestyle of a professional criminal. I think, you first come on, you just handle domestic disturbances and you don't really see much beyond that. And then I'd been on about 2 or 3 years, and we had some reports coming into the station, and I was just an officer at the time, street policeman, but I'd always read these offense reports, and we had this group of people who were hitting cars in hotels, because they were like people that had stuff in their cars and they were going to go on to another city. It was a pretty safe way to do some stuff. But I noticed there was a clue, and the detectives weren't really, a lot of the detectives back then, especially, they were old school. They were more into running their personal errands and maybe slipping off in the afternoon, having a few drinks rather than, or in the evening, rather than paying attention to some small crime that nobody was ever going to prosecute anyhow. But there was like 4 or 5 different things that they'd hit. I thought, these are local guys. And I hadn't found a tag number on one of them. So it's kind of my first little foray into being an investigator and detective. I ran the tag, came back to this guy's name. I'll never forget, his name was Larry Archer. And he was, had this history. Of course, he was 25, 28 years old, and he'd already been in and out of the joint a couple of times for theft kind of crimes. And he had an address over in Northeast. So I go over there, way out of my district, but I just go over there one day, and he doesn't live there even. But I start knocking on doors in the neighborhood, and I find somebody says, oh yeah, I remember him. I saw him. I heard he was living with some woman, over here about 8 or 10 blocks away. So I get her name, and I check her, and I find an address on her 8 or 10 blocks away, and I go over and start poking around, and now he's over there, and just kind of drive by once in a while and try to figure out if he's there or not, and get a couple of buddies of mine and say, okay, let's go over there and just rattle this guy a little bit. So we go over.
Are you in your regular clothes or?
No, we're in uniform. We're in uniform.
Yeah.
I think, probably be honest, I did go back out on duty in my regular clothes. I used to do that shit all the time, and do a little surveillance on him, because I wanted to be a detective. I wanted to be that guy that did those kinds of things like they do on TV, like Serpico or Beretta, or those kinds of guys. I wanted to be one of those guys.
Yeah.
So we go over there, we knock on the door, just kind of blow our way in like we used to do a lot. Not so much anymore, I don't think, and just kind of push our way on in. And he's in there, and he's a stone drug addict, and he's all jacked up. We just kind of push our way in, and they're back there in one of the other rooms. There's some like 2 or 3 sets of golf clubs. Like, what are these? So, like they have, one of them had a tag on it, so we get the name off that. We check in. Yeah, it was taken in one of those, from the trunk of a car at one of those hotels.
Yeah.
And so we went ahead and popped him and took him on in the station and booked him in and took pictures of all the stuff in there. We didn't have a search warrant. We just said, they invited us in. which they kind of did, I guess. You know, they didn't tell us not to come in.
Yeah.
And everything was in plain view. So once we found that one thing, we see these, so we have to take all the rest of it in, and we make a case on this guy. And you know, it was like, dang, you know, it was cool. I mean, and he was a professional criminal. That's all he did was do those kinds of things. And he was stone drug addict.
Yeah.
So, but my realization was that guy then goes away for not a very long period of time. He disappears off the street, but I kind of keep track of it. He comes back out, and he comes into another investigation we're running, where we've got a guy that by then I am a detective, and I am doing these kinds of things legally. And
how long did it take you to become a detective after you became a police officer?
About 2.5 years. I was in the uniform for about somewhere between 2 and 2.5 years. Before I got 3 years on, I was a detective, because I was gung ho and I caught people's attention doing stuff like that. You know, you catch their attention, and by then the police department's changing. There are a lot of these old school guys. It was a big bunch of us baby boomers that came on in 71 or 72. It's like 350 people to a 1,000 person police department. So that makes a big impact.
Wow, that's a big police department.
And so when that many guys come in, then the older guys start leaving, and as they start retiring, then, you know, the sergeants that are doing these things, they see that, you know, these young aggressive guys, and there's a bunch of us out there, we need to get them into those places.
Yeah.
So I got in there pretty quick, and so this guy, he's back out again, like a year and a half later, and this guy, we popped him on having a pass key for an apartment complex. He got it from the security guard. We turned him, and then we set him up, caught him inside one of those using that key, and then he turned on this Larry Archer, who I had popped about a year before.
Yeah.
And so this guy, we catch him on the inside. We bring him in and start interrogating him. I said, what's the deal, dude? Are you never going to go straight? He said, yeah, man. He said, I get in the penitentiary. He said, I get all cleaned up. He said, I start working out. I feel good. He said, then I come out and I don't know what happens. He says, I just get bored and kind of fall back in with my old friends. Next thing I know, I'm using again. Next thing I know, I'm, you know, doing these things again. So I realized this is a lifelong pattern for a lot of people. And I started over my career. I see that all over the place. That they build up and up, doing all these crimes, and they get caught. They do a little time, they get cleaned up, they get healthy, they get something going for themselves. He looked like a whole different guy when he first got out of the penitentiary. And months later, he's all emaciated and it looks like shit. He's out stealing again. Yeah. So, you know, it's just this lifelong pattern. So it's that was kind of the early stories that I remember, and the realization I had about people I was working on.
Yeah, you start to see that people, like you said, they have a pattern, and especially when you're dealing with a lot of them.
Yeah.
And you see they're coming out of jail, and crimes are being committed, and you pretty much know who's doing it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, kind of, sometimes you don't. It kind of depends, but once you start picking up a few clues, you'll start figuring out who it is. Kansas City's not that big a city, see, compared to New York or Boston or Chicago. We're not that big a city. We're almost like a small town comparatively. So everybody knows everybody. And it was always like we couldn't really have one of our guys do a real undercover kind of a thing. You could do drug buys and that kind of stuff, but it's too small a town to run into somebody you know from high school and say, hey man, you're still in the police department and shit like that. If we did anything important undercover, we would bring in a state trooper that had worked at other part of the state. We wouldn't use one of our own, except for like, you know, hand-to-hand street drug buys and those kinds of things. But nobody really worked at kind of real deep undercover long-term where you would be out acting like you were one of the guys.
Yeah. So do you remember your first murder that you investigated?
Oh, God. Let me think. I used to get assigned. I wasn't assigned to the homicide squad, but I used to get assigned to the homicide squad when they would get a lot of murders. So you would work you would be assigned to one of the one of the more minor murders when you were not actually a homicide detective.
Yeah.
I remember this one. It was kind of a travesty. I always thought we had this woman that had been beat to death, and no suspects it seemed like, but she had a son that was, I don't know, one of a better term, he was a half a bubble off a plum. He was probably a little bit mentally challenged, I think is the correct words now.
Yeah.
But he didn't seem dangerous, and we talked to him once, and we actually talked to other people who had been around him that day and found out what clothes he was wearing that day, and that he always carried this jam box with him. Everywhere he went, he had this jam box.
What's that, like a lunchbox? Like a
no, a jam box, like trying to think of the old movies. You're too young. The like a portable radio that's big. A portable radio. Yeah. It's about like that,
Yeah.
Portable radio. He just carried around on his shoulder. He'd have his tunes going all the time.
Yeah.
So this woman had been stabbed repeatedly, and we sent that jam box, and we sent his clothes that we had. Best we could tell, the ones that somebody told us described him. We found him in his clothes closet and got him out and sent him to the lab. And there wasn't any blood on him, so we dismissed him as a suspect right away, because if he always has a jam box and he had those clothes on that day, if he's stabbing this woman repeatedly, then it should have blood on it, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
So we kind of walked away, and I think they were sending us back to our burglary unit out at the station. And last I saw, there's another homicide detective. The sergeant had this kid back in, and they were browbeating the shit out of him, trying to get him to confess to this murder. And I'm just going, oh my God, he couldn't have done it. I mean, he couldn't have. And I often wonder whatever happened to that, because they were bragging about how they were going to charge him, get him cleared that murder, and they were going to charge him with murder. I thought, he didn't do it, man. He did not do it. I hope they never did. But like I said, you just walk away from those things sometimes.
Oh, so you don't even know what ended up happening with him?
I didn't want to know. I was afraid they did charge him. You know what I mean?
Oh, man.
So it doesn't say much for my moral courage, but, I was 27 years old, and been on the police department about 2.5 years, and you got to get along. So,
yeah.
But then about that same time, I actually worked on he was on his way to being a serial killer, which I thought was pretty interesting. A guy named, I won't even talk about his name yet because it was a mystery. And he had this whole city shut down, frankly. People were petrified. Started off one night, it was a late night, dirty bookstore at 31st and Main. And somebody came in like about midnight or something, about the time they should have been closing. And the guy was found shot to death, the clerk, behind the counter. A little bit of money gone. Well, it seemed like just a random robbery, and then he must have done something. And so the guy panicked and killed him, started shooting him. It was a 22 caliber revolver. I remember that because they figured out exactly almost what kind of gun it was from the riflings on the bullets that were in that guy. Mm-hmm. So we knew what we were looking for, and I wasn't actually assigned on that one yet. And about a week later, there was a Radio Shack. You remember Radio Shacks? They sold all kinds of electronics, and there's a Radio Shack downtown. And this was 31st Street, so downtown's like 12th Street. So it wasn't that far away, like 40 blocks just north of that along Main. It was about 12th and Main. And there's two young guys working as clerks in that Radio Shack, and somebody comes in late in the afternoon, and they're both back behind the counter dead. So damn, we started a squad, what we call a special squad, just for that, because they dug those bullets out pretty quick and matched them with that one at 31st and Main. It's like, oh my God, this is the same guy. He's doing robberies and executing the clerks every time. So, these people that worked in those kinds of stores, and this whole city was tense. People move into those stores, and they want to be in there when a guy like that comes in, because he's going to take them off too. He's killing witnesses is what he's doing. We figured that out. Yeah, he was killing witnesses. and then nothing for a while. And so you're out, there's no clues. We went back to that Radio Shack at the same time of day, like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and stopped all the cars and everybody that was walking by and said, did you happen to walk by here day before yesterday, whenever it was? That's one kind of a tactic that you would use to try to find somebody that maybe saw something. They didn't realize they saw something and didn't really know that they had some knowledge. And, that came up empty, and there was no cameras back then. There's no footage to go view or any of that kind of thing. You just kind of dead in the water. They get a lot of calls on crimes like that. You get tons of calls to what we had for this, a tips hotline back then. It wasn't tips hotline. I think they just called the homicide unit or the main number of the police department. They'd call in tips, and people would be mad at their relatives or their in-laws or their neighbor, and they call in and say, "Hey,
I think it's him.
I think it's him." So you go out and dutifully go out and interview him, or somebody would come in. It might even been during that. One of these older detectives said, "Hey, Gary, would you interview these people? I think they got something." Well, yeah, I'll go interview them. So I go take them back into an interview room. And about 5 minutes into it, I realized this is just a nutcase that's come in. And they have nutcases that come in all the time. Yeah. Not very politically correct there, but I think
was there people that would try to say they did it? And
I'm getting to that. It's my first experience with that. I mean, it's kind of this old experience, but it had a little bit of everything.
Oh man!
And I've got an informant that I've turned out there in the district, so to speak, and he was a little burglar that I let him off. I had him dead to rights. Actually, the second time, some of the other guys were mad at me. Said, "You can't let that little sucker off again, man," because I kind of gave him a break the first time. And he said he'd snitch, and he wouldn't. But the second time, I gave him one more. I said, "This is it, dude. Next time you're going down." Yeah. I'll never forget, that guy thought he was going to be taken across the street to the jail, the main jail from the police department headquarters. And when he thought he was going to, he was so scared that he was hyperventilating. He couldn't hardly catch his breath. I knew I had him then.
Yeah, you're like, you're mine, man.
Yeah, I got him a probation, deferred imposition of sentence, I think. And he started working for me, and he was doing okay. He was telling me a lot of different things that I needed to know, but just in his little neighborhood.
Yeah.
So Larry McDonald was his name. Actually, he called me after I retired, and he had had a variety of different jobs. He had a pretty decent job for the Jewish Community Center in a suburban area. And I had a policeman get home. He said, "Larry McDonald wants to talk to you." I said, "Larry McDonald? I hadn't thought about him in years." So I talked to him. He's had a great life. And he went totally straight and has a couple kids and a wife and a decent job. And
so he's good now.
He's good now. Yeah, I was happy to hear that. So anyway, Larry McDonald, he's got my phone number, and he calls me. He said, "Gary," he said, I can't remember this kid's name. Johnny. He said, "Johnny is telling everybody on the streets that he's the one that killed those 2 dudes down there at the Radio Shack downtown." I said, "Are you shitting me?" He said, "No." He said, he's told several people. So I go to the sergeant, and I said, "I got this kid, and he's always shot me straight before, and here's what he's telling me."
Yeah.
Talked to the sergeant a little bit. He said, he said, "Let's put my informant on polygraph." So I get hold of Larry. I said, "Will you take a polygraph on that?" And he said, "Yeah, I will." So he goes in, he passes the polygraph. So we go out. Later that after he passes that polygraph, I think, I am king shit now. I have solved this horrible murder. I am the guy.
Oh, you're thinking that, right?
Yeah,
you're like,
I'm the guy. You got to understand in my little world back then, you solve that kind of a murder, everybody knows your name on the police.
Yeah, you're going to be on the front page of the paper with a plaque.
Well, maybe so, but even more importantly, all the people on the police department know I'm the one that solved that murder. That was more important to me.
Yeah.
And so we go out and snatch this kid up, bring him in, sit him down. He doesn't ask for a lawyer or anything. And he's willing to talk to us. And he starts talking. And he's like, it's a classic. He's like holding out. And then he kind of starts breaking down a little bit, which is many times that's what happens. People, when they get accused of murder, if they did it, it's such a psychologically powerful crime that they've done, except for like, a mob guy or, somebody's some sociopath, but a normal person is so powerful that pretty soon they'll start breaking down a little bit. And then they'll do a little bit more. And this kid did that. and a little bit more. And so we've got him finally saying, yeah, he did it. And tried to ask him a few more questions about it. And I'm like, okay, we got him now, but we better get one of these old time detectives in here to, double check on this deal, because it's too big. We can't be wrong. We do not want to be wrong on this one.
No.
So I go out and get Bill Ritter. And so I see him in the hallway. He's a good guy. And he's a long time homicide dick. And I was still in burglary, just assigned to this squad.
Yeah.
I said, hey, here's what we got. He said, okay. He said, let me talk to him. So we go in. He comes in, and Rid starts asking a few questions. And he said, did you get any money on that? Oh, yeah. I got some money. I don't remember how much. Oh, I don't remember. I got some money. He said, well, how did you get the money? He said, guy just gave it to me. He said, well, now tell me exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. And the kid says, he said, he just went over to the cash register and hit the cash register and went ding, and the drawer opened up and he scooped out the money and handed it to me. Detective walked out. He said, Gary, come out here a minute. I said, what's the deal? He said, he didn't do it. I said, what do you mean he didn't do it? He just told you he did it and how he did it. He said he didn't do it because there was no cash register with a dinging sound. They had all their money in a drawer down in the cabinet down below. So if he'd have been there, he would have said they opened the drawer, but he made up this other. He didn't do it. So, okay. And I agreed with him. This guy was just a nutcase. Now to go back and squat in my informant, he didn't make that up. Finally figured out, piecing it together, more than likely he was such a nutcase that he was out telling people. He did tell everybody in the neighborhood that he did it just to get a reputation as a killer for whatever reason. I don't know.
Now, do you get in trouble for doing that, for making a false police report?
Oh, you can. Usually people don't. It's more trouble than it's worth. It's possible. It's possible to do. People have done it.
I've been to prison. I've been to prison for making a false police report.
Wow. You must have pissed somebody off.
Man. So I was in a situation where my girlfriend hit me in the face with a fan.
Yeah.
And ripped open my eye. I had to have plastic surgery. And I went to the gas station and I told the cops that a bunch of guys came and attacked me. And they followed the blood trail back to my house. And they saw that I was lying. I didn't want to get my girlfriend in trouble at the time. So I ended up getting charged with writing a false police report.
Yeah, well,
things happen, man.
Things happen. It kind of depends on the circumstances on whether you get charged with giving false information to the police. So in your case, they were mad at you.
You don't like me, man.
This guy here, he was just a garden variety nutcase, and it really wasn't worth messing with. You just put him back into custody somehow and have to take care of him. He was just bragging on the streets.
He probably wanted to make a name for himself.
He did.
So did the real killer ever get caught?
The next thing we know, we have another one in an adjoining suburban town called, name of it's Independence. So it's like right, Kansas City goes right into Independence, and it's it was a 7-Eleven or a Quick Trip, a convenience store. I think it was 7-Eleven, and they kill a clerk. Somebody kills a clerk there, and it's the same gun. Oh, I tell you what, everybody was just, we were beside ourselves. We got to do, what are we going to do? They're talking about, getting more guys in, running surveillances on convenience stores, but yet he's been dirty bookstore, a Radio Shack, and a convenience store. So, not real pattern. You look for a pattern sometimes late at night, middle of the afternoon. I think that convenience store was in the morning, so no time of day. It's a tough one, and no suspects. Well, what we didn't know this, another police department had jurisdiction actually, and this is like this little interjurisdictional rivalry you hear about every once in a while. They wanted to make the bus, just like I wanted to be the guy that made this case. They wanted to be the department that made this case. So they had a license number on a car. And they didn't tell anybody. They didn't put it in the police report. They kept it a separate report that their detectives had. They didn't tell anybody. So in the meantime, somebody gets some kind of a tip about a guy, and I don't remember what it was, but I was sent out to run down this lead. It's kind of a tip on somebody that maybe or maybe not. I think it was one of those things that it was real, iffy if this guy had anything to do with it, but I had a name, and it was Vincent Lee, and an address, an apartment. I go out to this apartment. There's nobody at his apartment, but we talked to the apartment. Actually, I didn't go into his apartment. We talked to the apartment manager to find out what we could find out about him. And she said, well, that's funny. She said, the Independence Police was just here asking those same questions about this guy. We said, what? So I go back downtown. I tell the sergeant in charge of the squad, I said, Red, the Independence Police are out running this same lead down. You know anything about that? He said, I don't know anything about it. Let me call over there and find out. In the meantime, I think later that afternoon, by the next morning, the headline is Independence Police arrest Vincent 2X Lee for homicide in Independence, for this convenience store homicide. And nobody knows at that point in time it's the same gun used in all those homicides. So they popped him and they got him running down. But somebody had gotten a license number and they ran him down from that license number.
Wow.
In his place. I don't remember what kind of a tip we had. We didn't really think it was a good tip. Turned out it was a good tip because that was him. Start checking on him, and he's a guy. He worked at the hospital at 31st and Main as an orderly. He spent a lot of time in penitentiary, and the last time he went down, he spent the most time, maybe 7 or 8 years, for a robbery in which the clerk testified against him. So we always assumed that he decided if he goes down again, it's not going to be because a clerk left behind to identify him and testify against him.
Yeah, so he just killed them all.
Right. And that first robbery that he did was just across the street from the hospital where he worked at. So, it's kind of all came down. They finally, I think, they worked up enough of a case for the triple where they were threatening with a death penalty, and he ended up copping to take life. And he broke down and even told where he disposed of the gun after that last one in Independence. He must have started reading the newspaper or something, because they got hold of somehow they got hold of it. You try to hold that stuff back, like the same guns used in a murder. You try to hold that back, but I believe they'd gotten hold of it by then, and he must have read the paper because he had disposed of that gun. I don't think we ever found it, but I think they identified him. I think somebody identified him coming out of that convenience store, and there was enough circumstantial evidence to put him in. And then when they put the death penalty on the table and offered to take it off, and then he copped him. And I'm sure he died in the penitentiary. That would have been 1975, probably.
75?
Yeah.
I'm going to look it up.
But before DNA, Vincent 2X Lee, it's a pretty interesting story. Actually, I looked up a bunch of the newspaper clippings on that once. I don't remember if I was going to do it on my podcast, but I don't remember if I must have probably have a file on that somewhere. I'll have to look and see what I've got.
Have you dealt with a lot of serial killers in your area?
Oh, well, we had a pretty famous one there, a guy named Bob Berdella. I did a podcast on that. A friend of mine was a sergeant in charge of the investigation. Bob Berdella, he killed, I think, about 11 or 12 young guys. He was what we call a chicken hawk. I don't know if you're familiar with that term or not. There's fruit hustlers and there's chicken hawks out there on the streets. Well, the fruit hustlers are the young guys. They're always young guys that grew up in, abusive families and all that, and they may or not be gay, and so they'll hang out in a particular area, and these older men who are gay will cruise those areas looking for them, and it's like, male prostitution is what it is.
Yeah.
And these guys, as it turned out, they started disappearing off the streets. But see, those kinds of kids are throwaway. They're always throwaway kids. Maybe most of them were of 18 or 19.
They're like runaways and all
that.
They're
runaways, and their family didn't have anything to do with them. So they were disappearing, but nobody really knew that. But one of them during this time, a kid named Jerry Howe, was a local kid, and he had a dad who was involved with him, and his dad knew that Berdella, this Bob Berdella, he had like a jump shop, a kind of weird kind of stuff store. Whatever you want to buy this weird, like maybe he's got some skulls or they're plastic skulls. They look like real skulls. Yeah, just all kinds of weird stuff like that, occult kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And he fit your stereotype of a serial killer like this in many ways. Anyhow, this kid was kind of hanging out in Burdell, and he liked to have some young boy around to help run errands. He'd pay him, and he'd offer to buy this kid a car, that kind of thing, like a $500 car or something.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the kid disappears, and his dad swore that Burdell is the one that did something, but nobody could prove it. The only thing that we knew that he was disappeared.
Yeah.
The kid's dad, he went to the missing persons sergeant. It was a guy I know pretty well, and he was a real aggressive dude. Lots of times people they go to missing persons and they want some kind of action done. Well, missing persons mainly just takes a report, put your name in the computer, and then sits back and waits for you to be found or your body to be found. They don't really have a staff to go out and do anything.
The family wants people to be out there looking. Yeah.
But it's never going to happen, right? I'll tell you, right? It ain't never going to happen. They'll have like 2 detectives who will sign to just take those reports, and maybe if some really hot lead comes in, they'll go out and run it down and maybe try to find somebody, or you get an inquiry from another police department, or somebody wealthy or powerful kid runs away, they'll then go out and beat some bushes for them, but mainly they don't do anything. And they don't really have time to run down every one of these kids, because most of them have gone to another city, or they're just out drugging it up and having a merry old time, and then reappear eventually. But this kid's disappeared, and he had a dad, and the dad was, the dad said, this ain't right. He goes, Tommy Boss is the sergeant's name, and he was a gung-ho dude, a really good policeman himself, and he didn't have to do this, but on his own, he would have some dead time at work. Lots of times you got time to sit around, there's nothing to do. He'd go out and he would, try to gather some kind of information about Burdell and see if he could help find this kid. And, it was coming up nothing. In a kind of ironic story, I guess. I don't know if ironic's the right word, but the dad was even going out and getting Burdell's trash and going through it. That's something we often did in the organized crime unit, was go trash a guy and see what's in it. And I popped some guys with some kilo level dealers drugs by doing that one time. But so he even went through his trash and nothing. So we go on about a year later, the kid's gone. And the district guys, the 911 call comes in. Call goes out, says, reported, naked man wearing a dog collar has run into somebody's house and needs help. So they go out and say, what's going on here? You just figure, I'll tell you, you get kind of jaded to all this kind of stuff. I've made more than one call on one of those kind of a gay, weird sex thing that's gone wrong. And you get in there, nobody really wants to prosecute, but they're mad at somebody right then. But they get there, and this kid's going, that guy over there just across the street, he's been holding me prisoner upstairs in the upstairs bedroom for the last week. And that's when I had this dog collar I tied onto me, and I convinced him to untie my hands enough to where I could move around just a little bit. And he still thought he had me, shackled down pretty good, but he said, I got away and I crawled out the window from the second floor. He dropped out the window of the second floor to the ground. Lucky he didn't break his leg doing that. So he ran across the street. So So they go over, and this guy is not home. About that time he comes home. And they, Mr. Burdell, we need to talk to you. And he said, I'm not talking to you. And by then they've alerted detectives downtown. They've come out and say, hey, man, we got to do something here. I believe what they did, they took the kid downtown by then, got him some clothes, of course, got the dog collar off of him, take a statement from him, and then based on the statement, they go across to the prosecutor and get a search warrant for this guy's house for some of the things this guy said he saw that would be something, evidence to prove. Because you get a search warrant, you can't go in anybody's house without a search warrant, especially like that. Now, if you already bulled your way in, sometimes you can kind of slide and see something in plain view. But in this case, nobody had been inside, and that guy was not cooperating. He was not going to let anybody inside. They had locked down. They blocked him from going in the house and kept people on the outside. And he just left, went back to his business. So they got the search warrant. They get inside, and one of the early things they find, and it's filthy in there. It's filthy. It stinks to high heaven. They find like a part of a chicken that's been sitting in a pot that he must have tried to boil at one time. It's just it's like mildewing and rotten in that pot, and just stuff, crap everywhere. It's like nobody had ever cleaned that place ever, you know. And these guys, I've been in those houses, and the smell is just, oh my God. And, I remember one, I just started walking down the hallway of the apartment. I just started gagging. I couldn't do it. I had to walk away. You know, you go get some kind of little cigar or something, light it up, and get that smell going, and you couldn't do it. But and so they like started looking, and one of the first things they find is pictures, Polaroid pictures. This is like 1980 something. Polaroid cameras were still being used. And they find these Polaroid pictures of these kids, these young men, and it looks like they're in maybe being tortured, or maybe they're even dead. From looking at them, they've got about 10 or 12 of them in this one thing, and they find a log where he keeps a log. And he has like kind of like codes about maybe who it is, but it's got times. And he said like administer DFT, no response. Administer something else, you know, he's groaning. And it turns out that was his torture log. And so what we finally figured out is they went through that house, and then they know they got something by now, especially with these pictures. And they brought out all the crime scene guys. They start digging up the backyard. They find one dead body in the backyard. They find one skull that's a skull, but it's the forensic people said it was recent enough. This isn't like an old skull. Yeah, this is, you know, within the last few years skull. And so, you know, and they start trying to. This is before DNA was big time, but there was some ways to start identifying people from body parts. And they, you know, they realize now we've got dead bodies for sure. So they get him in and get him charged and in jail with no bond.
And it was that Bobby guy, right? It was the Bob
Burdell is his name. Yeah. That's the guy's name. And Jerry Howe, they never found Jerry Howe's body. They found a picture of him hanging upside down in the guy's basement. Oh, it was horrible. It was horrible, especially for that family. The family never really recovered from it, actually. And all these other guys, and so now what they have to do, they have to identify these people, because you got all these victims, but you don't know who they are, and you don't have their bodies. Well, come to find out, later on, Burdell finally gives a detailed confession to avoid the death penalty again, and he was cutting up some of those bodies and putting them out in the trash. So when that Jerry Howe's dad was out there trashing him, he just missed. You know, one time or two times that, you know, he just missed the times that the dude would put body parts in the trash and let the trash man haul along.
And it could have been his own son.
Oh yeah, it could have been. Wouldn't that have been something? It was something. It was a hell of a story.
Wow, that's a crazy story, man.
And you know, these guys go out and they identify everybody in all those pictures, and that they were really people, and this is who they were, and nobody's heard from them again. So they put that together. They got all that evidence. Like in one of the pictures where it's apparent the guy's dead, his arms are tied behind his back, and there's a stick about that long, about a foot long, a brown stick, and his arms are both tied to that stick, and they find that stick in there. And so, you just start gathering all those little tidbits of evidence. And I say that story because, in the end, he cops a plea. Jerry Howe's dad tried to attack him right in one of his hearings in the courtroom, but that was kind of the end of the drama, and he ends up giving this full confession. Nobody's ever seen that confession. They put that under lock and key after he did it. It was really bad. His friend of mine, Troy Cole, was a sergeant. He was one that sat there with another detective, the prosecutor, and took this full confession. Troy just said, he said, you just wouldn't believe it, Gary. He said, it was just, he would say it just like there was nothing. It was like when he was torturing these kids and he had his torture log, he was like shooting battery acid into their eye or maybe shocking them with a cattle prod kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And then he would catalog what he did in code, and then he would write the response. So you were able to decipher the torture logs then. Oh, it was crazy.
And he was doing that to kids until they died?
Yeah, right. And he basically kind of starved them to death. And I can't remember exactly how he killed them. A lot of them were basically starved to death. You could see in their pictures, they were so emaciated that obviously he hadn't been feeding them.
How many people did he kill? Do you know?
I think 12 or 13. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember. Never found any of the other bodies. He disposed of all of them. Never found any. Only the one body was the one skull that was inside, and then another person who was the body in the backyard. Rather than that, didn't find any bodies.
So besides that case and the other one, was there any other cases that were death penalty cases where they got the death penalty?
Well, I can't remember, but I'm going to tell you one more thing about that. More modern times is I'm all over the internet on mob stuff, but true crime stuff. I got a Facebook page and all that. And especially locally, a lot of people know me. And I got a gal got in contact with me, and she was a relative of this Jerry Howe. And she sent me a screen cap of somebody was selling Bob Berdella's stuff. And it was like, well, they're selling that stick that you could see in that picture. Somebody has that stick and they got it for sale. There's this whole group of murderabilia people out here in the United States. I didn't even know that before then. It turned out I know a guy that does do this kind of stuff. And so there's websites that sell this kind of thing, and you can put them up on consignment, or you could sell it all in bulk. And then she sent me another screen cap, and I stared at the police department. I said, I can't do anything. Here's somebody to call on the police department. And about that same time, I get another screen cap from a guy. It's a macabre collector, I think is what he goes under. He's the guy selling this stuff. And so he asked me, he said, is this real? And so he shows me an evidence bag. And I look at the evidence, it's a picture of what we call an evidence bag. It's got tape on it, and it's got initials on the tape. So whenever you put something in a bag and seal it as evidence, the crime scene investigator maybe writes their name and puts their initials on it, right? And it was yours. It wasn't mine, but it was a friend of mine. It was Mel Beverly. It's like, damn, he was a crime scene investigator during Berdella's time. He would have, this is real. And as we got, and the police department kind of got into it, trying to figure out what the deal was. As we got into it, we find out that there's this local guy who's eccentric and has a shitload of money. He's like a multi-millionaire.
Yeah.
And so when Berdella left his house, this guy bought his house and had it taken apart and shipped out to where he lived in some kind of a storage facility out there. So he had the whole house, taken apart and shipped out or taken out there where he lived. It turns out when Berdella was copped the plea, you don't need the evidence anymore. He's not going to go. He's not going to go to trial again. He can't go to trial again. So everything that was taken as evidence is his. You have to give it back to people unless they don't want it. Usually people don't want it. But it's their property. You only keep it for a certain period of time unless you. What? Well, yeah, the government can't take your property unless you have a civil procedure in order to deprive you of it. But they can't keep it temporarily as evidence. And then when the trial's over and it's not, government doesn't need as evidence anymore, then if you want it back, you can get it back. So this guy hired a lawyer and he went to the police department. So, he wants all his stuff back. So, of course, they gave all the evidence that they'd taken out of the house back to him. And it's now being sold on one of these murderabilia sites. And that stick is that's one of the more higher prices, like $25,000 or something for that stick.
That's crazy. I thought after the murder trial, I thought they destroyed all the evidence. I didn't know.
Not if the people that own it want it back. Because you didn't, government can't seize your property without due process.
Yeah, but if it's a pistol or something, they could take that and destroy it, right?
Maybe. Used to, you would. Anymore, you wouldn't. If somebody wanted it back, I tell you, I promise you today, They're not destroying guns like they used to because the gun lobby and the gun laws have changed so much that you don't have those kinds of loose regulations or loose regulations from the government standpoint to take something and destroy it. We used to all the time, but nobody ever challenged it. But people have challenged all that since then. And so more likely, if you own that gun and they don't need it for evidence anymore, and I can say, that's my gun, then I get it back. Like if they'd stolen it from me, you give it back to me. If you didn't, but you keep it until you need it, until you didn't need it anymore for evidence. Yeah. And so, the suspect should have the same rights. Now he's a convicted felon now, so he can't get his gun back. So you got to kind of have to weed your way through the different laws that come into play on that deal.
So now, if a killer has a knife or something that he used, he could get that knife back, or the pictures he took of the victims.
He should be able to.
That's insane. That like doesn't even make sense to me.
Now, a knife, there's no law against him having it. He could he might be in penitentiary. He could send a relative down, but he could release it to that other person.
Wow.
But yeah, you could, because it's your property, unless the government moves and has a civil procedure in front of a judge. I had a client that was kind of a small-time drug dealer, and they served a search warrant on him. They took 3 or 4 guns, and he wanted them back after this was over. Well, he did his probation. He got a probation. When it was over, he wasn't a convicted felon. He wanted his guns back. Yeah. So I get hold of them, and they're like kind of playing hardball with me. And I'll tell you the truth, I just didn't want to mess with it. I knew I was researching a little bit, and I'm not that good a criminal lawyer. That's why that was like the only real deal criminal case I took. I didn't want to be part of him getting those guns back.
Yeah.
So I just said, here's the name of a guy that will do something like that for you, and you need to go see him. All he's got to do is file a writ of replevin with the court, and then the court, and unless the government shows some compelling interest why they need to keep those guns, they have to give them back to you because you're not a convicted felon, and they don't need them anymore. And the paperwork shows that they were taken from you, and they're not stolen. So they'll have to give them back, but you're going to have to go through a procedure because they just play hard. As a government, you can play hardball with a little guy, and you'll just, fold your cards and go away. You won't argue with it at all.
So I allegedly was involved in a hit and run about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And I took it to trial, and I won. And so at the end of the trial, they said, we have the bumper for the car.
They give it back to you?
They said, do you want it? I said, I wasn't involved. It wasn't my car. So,
well, see, that's the same thing.
Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah, so I really enjoyed having you on my show, man. I'm definitely want to have you on for a couple more episodes, and we'll talk about some more mafia related stuff next time.
All right, cool. I was going to do my next Zoom call for all my podcast fans, that guys that give me money and stuff about murders that I've worked. So you kind of got me tuned up for that.
Yeah, man, that's cool, man.
All right, Bill.
So, make sure you hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell so you can get my videos every time they drop.
All right. Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me on. Talk to you later.